Hello everyone, welcome to the lab. So lab 1, we'll talk about introduction to the lab of molecular biology class. We'll be talking about the lab safety issues, lab documentation, how important that is when you work in the lab, and then basic some lab measurements of different kind. We call them scientific measurements. So we'll practice some of those hands-on lab measurement skills. First of all, introduction to the lab. So we will do the lab in the lab space, face-to-face mostly. So our lab is located in the building called Indiana Center for the Life Sciences. Especially S104 will be the lab. We will be staying mostly throughout the semester. So I want you to be familiarized with the space. You will see probably a bunch of lab instruments of different kinds on your lab bench and surrounding areas, and when you deal with those, you need to be careful. You need to know how to handle, how to use those. So I'll give you instruction on those, and then you may be moving back and forth between S104 and maybe the prep room, which is located right next to it. There are some resources like lab glasswares and then lab balances and things like that, so you may need to get those from that room. So I will show you the important things in that space sometime soon. First of all, let's talk about lab safety rules. So before that, let's take a look at this diagram where this lady is doing something, right? So what do you think this lady is doing? It seems like she's holding something in her mouth, right? And then she's tossing something, targeting that trash can. And then what do you think about the organization of her lab bench? And you may be able to tell me what things are being done not quite right. You can probably point out. So this is not the really exemplary lab setting, of course. You know, the organization is bad. She's mouth pipetting, which is dangerous, of course, and the sign says something is being used which is not really safe. So if radioactivity material is being used, you have to be cautious by wearing personal protective equipment and things. But I don't think she's doing that at all. So this is a bad example. You don't want to do anything like this when you work in the lab. Okay? So lab safety rules. These are all important things that you need to keep in your mind. So number one, advanced familiarity with procedures. So you know, your handouts are posted in your course shell, so you can take a look at those before you start working in the lab, of course. So you need to know what you'll be doing in the lab. That helps you a lot. So once you know what you're doing, what you will be doing, you will be ready for your task. All right, so that's important. And then, of course, it's common sense. No eating, drinking, smoking allowed in the lab. The reason is, you know, there are a lot of dangerous toxic chemicals used in the lab. You don't want to get any of those going into your system. So we do not allow eating, drinking, smoking in the lab. Smoking is not allowed on campus, so you know that. And then you need to wear protective lab gear. So lab gown is required. So there will be some, you know, disposable lab gowns that you can use in the lab. You're welcome to find the right size lab coat and put them on. That will be the first thing you want to do when you come into the lab. Okay, and then sometimes you will have to wear gloves on your hands, so to prevent, you know, anything be observed through your skin. You may have to put on your gloves. I will tell you when you need to put on your gloves. And then besides those, you may have to wear protective eye goggles. Okay, so we have some safety goggles located in the lab, so I'll show you where they are. You need to put them on. And then sometimes you need to handle things aseptically by going through aseptic technique. I don't know if you heard that term before, but aseptic technique means it's a way of handling things without getting things contaminated. Okay, so there are particular ways of doing things, so I will hopefully be able to teach you that technique soon. Okay, and the labels. So labels, if you look at maybe chemical bottles in the lab, you know, they will have all the labels. So labels are, I guess, one of the important forms of documentation. So the label should have the names or identity of the chemicals in that storage bottle and who made that, and then the maybe date that was made. So the essential information should be found from the label. So later on you may be able to you will be making some lab solutions and things, then I want you to make sure you label those appropriately. Okay, and then SDS forms are available in the lab. So SDS stands for Safety Data Sheets. So like I said, there are a bunch of chemicals that are being used in the lab, and some of those chemicals are very toxic and dangerous. So if there's any incident that happens, maybe you are exposed to chemicals and solutions, you probably need to know what is needed to be done on your body on that chemical spill, right? You may have to rinse them out, and when you rinse it, do you use water or what other solutions you need to use? So all those important information about the chemical is found from that SDS form. So normally those SDS forms for all the chemicals that we use stored in the lab, those are found in the building somewhere. Okay, so I will tell you where they are. So if needed, and everyone should be able to get access on SDS forms and find the information you need. Okay, so understand what SDS are and why they're important. So every lab in the United States at least should have the file folders with SDS forms in them. That's one of the rules that are strongly recommended by the OSHA, okay, the agency. So you should be able to find information from there. And then we're not going to be using Bunsen burners, but if you get to use them anywhere in the lab, you will be able to make sure that you use them safely, and when you're done you need to turn them off. Okay, makes sense. And then sharp material disposal. So I don't think you'll be using any syringes with the needles or razor blade, but if you get to use those, there are disposal containers for those materials, and which may be different from broken glass disposal boxes. So I will show you where those are. So when you deal with those, there are special places for those. You need to understand those. And when you walk in the lab, it is an important hygiene requirement. You need to wash your hands. Maybe it'll be good to do that at least after you're done working in the lab. So of course you'll put on your gloves, but even with gloved hands, after you're done you'll remove your gloves and get rid of those, and then it'll be better to wash your hands all the time. Okay, personal injuries, hopefully that's not going to happen to you, but if you get hurt while working in the lab, then you need to probably let me know. So you need to get necessary medical treatments that's needed. So communicate with me if anything happens. Okay, and then use a fume hood when you deal with toxic chemical materials. So we have a fume hood in the lab, S104, as well as a biosafety hood. I will tell you which one is a fume hood, which one is a biosafety hood. The purpose of those hoods are different. Fume hoods are made and used to prevent you from getting exposed to toxic chemicals, but biosafety hoods are used for your aseptic techniques. Okay, so they are made and used for different purposes. So hopefully we'll be able to go through those when the time comes. And then review rules and sign the form. So I will give you a form. It's kind of contract form that you need to read all these basic lab rules and sign up your name and date. So that's a kind of contract saying that you will be following the lab. Okay, so we'll do that in the lab. Okay, so the documentation is the next topic. So lab safety is very important, so I hope everybody will be safe while working in the lab. The next important topic is documentation. Okay, so documentation basically means what? Whatever the information you gained in the lab, you should write down before you forget everything, right? So what is the reason for that? Because without your documentation, of course, you don't gain anything. So no documentation means no quality control, or no documentation means you didn't do anything. So according to the government agency so-called FDA, Food and Drug Administration, they have this policy. If there is no documentation, there's nothing ever happen. So basically saying, documentation is the only evidence of your work. So if you want to say that you did something in the lab, you did experiment, you gathered data, then in order for you to be able to prove that, you have to have the written evidence. That's your documentation. Okay, so that's how important it is. If you're making something to sell in the market, you have to have documentation with the product. Without it, nobody will buy it, right? It's simple as that. And then no publication, no evidence for your wonderful work. Yes, like I told you, documentation is the evidence, main evidence of your work, and especially if you're working in the field of science, right? So how do you get credit for your wonderful scientific work? You get credit through your scientific publication. Okay, your publication is form of documentation, of course. Okay, so if you want to develop your publication, you have to have accumulated evidence of your work. So again, that's the lab documentation, how important that is. So these are the general purpose of documentation. Number one, record, procedure, observation. Of course, it's the record of all your procedures, what you have done, what you will be doing, and all your observation. That's the record. Okay, it's a period. And then establish ownership for a patent, for example. So you said you invented this wonderful product, or you invented this process or method. You want to get the credit. How do you know if that's your idea, your own genuine idea or not? You have to have the evidence, right? Again, documentation is your only evidence. So make sure you have that documentation with you. And tell workers the procedure and instruction on how to get things done. So I'll be giving you a bunch of handouts. Okay, those are my kind of form of communication. I'm telling you how you can get this experiment. You need to read those documentation and follow. Okay, otherwise you cannot get that done. So it's a way of instructing you how you follow instruction and get the things done. So again, it's a form of documentation, right? And then establish specifications for evaluating process product. Again, so based on the documentation, you can understand if things went well, or if the product has the quality that you need, if the product meets the specification. So again, that's the importance of documentation. And then demonstrates correct performance. Again, if you did your experiment, you'll be writing down your experiment, the procedure and data, result, conclusion in your notebook, right? So if anybody questions your work, your data, okay, you can show your lab notebook and they'll read over and see if everything makes sense, right? So your correct performance will be evaluated through your documentation. I'll be asking you to write your lab notebook, and I'll be checking those out periodically, maybe 3 or 4 times throughout the semester. And then I'll be also asking you to write your lab reports. At least a couple of times you need to write your lab report and turn them in. So again, I'm going to evaluate how good your lab reports are. Okay, and record of operating parameters of instruments. So like I told you, there are a bunch of lab instruments in the lab. Nobody's going to stand next to it and teach you how to use those instruments all the time. So if you don't know how to use them, how do I teach yourself how can use the instrument? There should be a documentation about the instrument. Maybe it's called SOP, Standard Operating Procedure. You read over and find out how you use that instrument, because SOP will give you guideline, step-by-step procedures of how you use the instrument. Okay, another form of documentation. Ensure traceability. Traceability means what? If there's a problem, you can find out what the source of the problem is by reading your documentation. So error should be traceable through the documentation of different kinds. Establish contract between a company and a regulatory agency or consumer. Like I said, the FDA is the government agency that regulates all the medical products, pharmaceutical products, medical devices. So when a company sells those to the US market, they are basically contracting between the customer and the company, and then between the the regulatory agency FDA and the company, saying that yes, we are selling the quality product. Everything we did to make the product was correct and very accurate. Okay, this makes sense, all right?